Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. It's such a pleasure to be joined by Heather McGowan. Heather is an author and future of work strategist. She's had a really substantial influence on the way I think about the future of work and the future of education. Heather advises and gives keynotes for organizations all over the world. She provides consulting services to help organizations adapt to the fourth industrial revolution. Her think tank is called Work to Learn because she believes that in the third industrial revolution, we learned one time in order to work. And now in the fourth industrial revolution, we will work in order to learn, but we'll do that continuously and in a lifelong manner. She's the author of the book, Disrupt Together, How Teams Consistently Innovate. She's a frequent Forbes contributor. She's mentioned all the time in media, especially in the New York Times. It's where I learned about Heather was in the book, Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman. Her most recent book on the future of work, The Adaptation Advantage, was released around mid-April, April 15th or so. I've been on a personal mission the last several weeks to learn as much as I can while we have a little extra time. And that mission extends to connecting global thought leaders to my network in the region. Sometimes it's been difficult. There have been a few no's along the way, and all of us are being pulled in a million directions, and days seem to blend together. So I finished reading the book on the 25th, and I knew I needed to reach out to her. And I spent hours agonizing over the perfect message to send on LinkedIn. I walked away a few times, came back to it, scrapped it, rebuilt it, sent it on Sunday morning. And let's just say I used every character LinkedIn allows in a message. And 10 minutes later, Heather replied with, "Hi, Todd, sure. What do you want? When do you want to do this?" So Heather, thank you for making this as easy as it can be, and welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I think that there has never been a more important time for us to have connection and direction than in the middle of this virus. And I appreciate you having the book over your shoulder there. That's very sweet. And when Chris Shipley and I were writing the book, we went through all different covers and different titles and stuff like that. And it's kind of eerie how the shape of the figure on the book kind of looks like a virus, and how we went with the word adaptation. Yeah. After going through a number of just different titles, I was like, maybe it'll grow on me. But I'm quite happy with it right now.
When did you actually write the book? Is it around Q4 or before that?
Yeah, so we've been, Chris and I have been writing together for 3 or 4 years now. We've written many versions of the book. We knew we were writing a book on the future of work. And I used interactions with my audiences over the last about 100 keynotes to sort of say, what's most impactful for you? What are you walking away thinking about? What do you still have questions about? And use their reactions to shape the book. So it's really shaped to what the audience understood and needed to understand. So when we sort of put pen to paper and said, this chapter's, do this week, and this week, it was July 19 to late September.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about the perspective you had when you were writing it? We were living in a time of pretty significant abundance. There was a all-time low on unemployment, and then this. So what impact has COVID-19 and the crisis had on your points of view about some of the topics in the book?
I didn't take, and nor did Chris, neither one of us took the book to say we're in a period of abundance and it's going to continue forever. We more looked at, while we may have low unemployment, we've had high underemployment. We haven't been maximizing human potential. We haven't been maximizing social mobility. And we've been sort of wearing out the old paradigms of learn in the first third of your life, work in a singular job and a singular occupational identity, even if it's across multiple jobs, retire, collect a pension, and then by design die a year later. That was the original model. It's no longer relevant. And now we need to get into learn in order to learn for life, leverage that learning, which is what work becomes, to signal that work and learning become a combined act. And then longevity, because we didn't plan for, nor can we realistically have a 30-year vacation at the end of our lives. And it's not just financially, but it's cognitively and psychologically. We need to remain engaged. So in order to do that, in order to get people in a position to learn and adapt across their entire lives, they can't have a singular occupational identity. They have to understand how they learn, what motivates them internally. It can't be just external motivators anymore, so that they're driving their own future. And if we get more folks in that position, we'll unleash more human potential, we'll have greater economic growth, we'll have greater income equality, we'll have greater value creation. We we were looking at, and this was all before the virus, and then the virus enters and everything kind of gets blown apart. And everything Chris and I talk about in the book, for the most part, is true. It's just happening so much faster. So perhaps you read the Forbes article I wrote that the coronavirus is accelerating the future of work. And that's really pushing our transformation to digital even faster.
Yeah.
And in doing so, that's really human transformation. So what we've been doing over the past, it says 60 some odd days now, but it was true in the first 14 days. We have done massive adaptations across, what we do for work, how we work, who works, where we work. We've stretched in a number of really interesting ways. Companies have pivoted product lines, people remap supply chains, leaders managing remote teams, and faculty members who are resistant to learning online are doing so and succeeding. So it's been a really, really interesting time to have a book come out, but also have a book come out on those subject matters where everything we thought driven by technology and globalization is accelerated by a virus, pushing us to make more of the adaptations we needed to make sooner.
The format for today is Heather was kind enough to offer to do a mini talk for us, and I thought we could start with a couple of questions, which we've done, and then jump into that and come back. I want to encourage everybody that's listening to enter some questions through the Q&A, because I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to learn from a great thought leader like Heather on the future of work. I've got one question before you jump into content. There's a big difference between adaptation and flexibility. You have a very specific context around adaptation. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. And then and here I just want to make sure I'm quoting the person who taught me this, because I have so many teachers out there. Professor Jeff Lapine from Arizona State has said the difference between adaptation and flexibility is adaptation requires learning and unlearning. So flexibility is like reaching in your toolbox and using a tool you've used before, dropping a tool you might be using now, but reaching one you've used before in a process you've likely done before. That's sort of pivoting between two tools and two known processes, whereas adaptation is reaching into your toolbox, pulling out a tool that's not fully formed to try a process you've never done before. So you're reshaping the tool, reshaping the process, letting go of something yourself and learning something new. And that's the difference between adaptation and flexibility.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to just take you a quick fly through the book. So the book has 3 key points. The first is the future of work is rapid learning, unlearning, and adaptation. The second is, in order to do this, we have to let go of the way we've always done it, and equally and perhaps more important, who we think we are. And in order to lead in this new normal, we have to be comfortable with ambiguity and vulnerability, allowing us to become champions of human potential and learning tours filled with the unknown. And boy, are we in the middle of one of those right now. So part one is called Adapting at the Speed of Change. I'm going to add a few pieces here, calling it the coronavirus edition. So we are going through the greatest velocity of change in human history. At the same time, we're making our greatest leaps in human longevity. So for example, if you were born back when the steam engine came out, you had 2.5 generations to absorb the impact of that change. Fast forward to today, depending on your age, you may have to adapt to 2, 3, 4, 5 different paradigm shifts within a single generation. We're not ready for that. And so one of the things I used to say pre-virus in my talks is that it's now everyone's #1 job to help other people adapt to change. And that's even more true now, as we're all kind of dealing with so many uncertainties and unknowns. So the velocity of that change, as I mentioned in just the prior framework, is really exponential, and it's driven by technology. Exponential change is that every step forward is double the prior step. So it goes from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, whereas human adaptation has long been linear, 1, 2, 3, 4, if you think about it as steps. And the tension between those two lines as they grow further and further apart is one of the things that we reference as being sort of our adaptability gap. But something just happened very recently, 60 days ago, and I say that the coronavirus is an accelerant. It's accelerating our transformation to digital, which is really human transformation. And if you sort of zero in on that, It's been about 60 days right now, but this was true in the first 14 days. We've made tremendous change in how we work, where we work, what we do, and who does it. So if you look at the center of this and you say this is BC, before coronavirus, as many of us who can work from home are working from home, and it's going fairly well. For those essential workers out there, some of them worked in dangerous jobs before. In healthcare, it was probably always dangerous that you could be exposed to something. But working in a grocery store didn't used to be dangerous, didn't used to require protective equipment. Delivering packages didn't used to be dangerous. And now there's sort of a slew of people working in an environment that didn't used to be dangerous, but now is. People have pivoted product lines from alcohol to, or perfumeries to hand sanitizer, from fashion to personal protective equipment, from automobiles to ventilators. We've reworked processes and remapped supply chains. Anybody out there who's a parent, my God, you're a full-time teacher now as well. And I know you're exhausted, and we need to have empathy for those folks. And then all managers out there have had to establish trust and psychological safety in order to lead the remote teams. And the really visionary leaders out there have said, what are we good at? Where is the need? And how quickly can we get there? And so that's a pretty big stretch from the center. Again, it's 60 days, but it happened in the first 14 days. And the question now becomes is, there was before coronavirus and there'll be after coronavirus. And while we're in this liminal space, what will snap back to the center and what is better the way that it is now? And I think we need to figure that out over the next several months. So, excuse me, life used to exist like this: education, career, retire. Whether you went to university or not, education was the first third of your life, sufficient only to get you on the career escalator, collect a pension, and by design die a year later. We were successful here if we codified and transferred the right predetermined skills and existing knowledge in you just to get you on that career ladder. That was really the goal of sort of learning and workforce prep. Now it looks like this. Life expectancy may not be 90 yet, but education becomes learning to imply there's no end state to it. It's continuous. Work becomes leverage of that learning to signify that work and learning are a combined act. And longevity becomes a reality because we didn't plan for, save for, nor should we have a 30-year retirement. It's not good for us psychologically or cognitively. So it looks more like this. And success measures here are, can we learn, adapt, and create new value continuously? In order to do that, we have to think differently about how we define ourselves, think differently about how we prepare people for work, think differently about how we screen for talent, think differently about how we manage. It changes all our paradigms. So I say in the past, we learned once in order to work, and now we need to work in order to learn continuously. In that past, our identity was bestowed upon us. It was externally validated. So it was the degree you had, the company you worked for, your trade union, however it is you worked or were credentialed for work. And now we need to develop a self-actualized identity that's internally validated and sort of more self-propellant. So we have these questions that are ridiculous that we ask people. What do you want to be when you grow up? 100% of jobs are going to change. We don't know what percentage of jobs are going to be new, but 100% of jobs are going to change. This number is probably not right, but it's the one everybody uses. 47% of tasks they predicted could be automated, work tasks. It's not jobs, but tasks within those jobs by 2033. Who knows if that number is right, but again, 100% of jobs are going to change. We ask university students to pick a major before they step foot on campus, or today dial into Zoom, which means they're picking their future self based upon what they've been exposed to in high school, what they've been told they were good at in high school, what their social group does, their parents, and there's huge social mobility implications of that. And when you think about the cost of higher education, education becomes more of a weight than a propellant. And that's a really important concept. We need education in this country to propel people forward, to make them better value creators. But if we saddle them full of debt and have them winnow in on a future self based upon a childhood vision with little exposure to all the things they might be good at, it becomes more of a weight than a propellant. And we ask each other, what do you do when studies have found it takes twice as long to recover from the loss of a job than it comes from the loss of a primary relationship? And young people graduating today could have 16, 17 different jobs across 5 different industries, yet we ask them to myopically focus on one future self at a very young age based upon limited exposure, and these become traps, making it very hard to learn and adapt. So the only thing moving faster then technology change, our adaptation to it, and perhaps even the virus is shifting societal and cultural norms. There are three questions we ask ourselves, who and each other, as a way of defining our personal identity. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? And I've been tracking these dimensions of societal and cultural change for a couple of years now. I've got it down to like 13 or 14 of the most important ones. So we're going through racial changes. This is US based, covers much of the developed world. We're changing our racial composition, religious composition. We used to be a Judeo-Christian. It was mostly a Christian norm. We have more people now who are parts of religions that are beyond Judeo-Christian, and many more people who are not connected to any religion at all. We used to be a youth and middle-aged culture. In the developed world, we are an aging society. We're below population replacement for the most part. Family units, mom and dad and 2.5 kids. I'm a middle kid, I'm now extinct. We are having fewer kids, we're having more types of families. 40% of kids are born outside the institution of marriage, and we have marriage equality, so there are different family types. This is the fastest moving marker. I think gender identity was fixed and binary 5 or 6 years ago. It's decidedly fluid now, and it's particularly true of the younger generations. I'm a Gen Xer. Gen Xers, boomers and above, we may know somebody who's non-gender binary in our social circle, but if you're a millennial and Gen Z, 30–40% of them have somebody in their social circle, a close social circle, they know is non-gender binary. It's much more of a norm for them. You can put X on your license plate, your driver's license, in 13 states in the US, up from like 3 a few years ago. You get on the London Tube, they say good morning everyone. They said good morning ladies and gentlemen 2 years ago. So it's changing globally. They was the word of the year for Webster's to indicate a non-gender binary person, and it was just added to both Oxford and Webster's dictionary. So that's a really fast change. Education, single dose, one and done, that has long not really been true, but we haven't fully adapted to continuous learning. We used to trust what the media told us, or what was on the news, or what we read in the newspapers. Now we don't trust institutions anymore. We don't trust government. We don't trust the media. But we trust each other and our own opinions, because you can come up with any idea and Google somebody who agrees with you and feel validated. And it's a little dangerous right now in the age of a virus not to have trust in our institutions. Sexual harassment was permissible when women entered the workforce. Me Too and Time's Up movement have changed it, not enough yet, but changed it in some areas of society and higher up business and some government. Occupation, I mentioned this earlier, we have had a fixed occupational identity. Portfolio self-expression is probably not the right word. I haven't found a better one yet, but we have to think about some way to talk about how we express ourselves around work that isn't tied to a singular job or a singular role or a singular company, because we're going to have many learning tours. We may have multiple ones at once. So we have to think about a different way of answering that question. Leadership and authority. White guys, you've had a great run. We are now going to see more diversity in our leadership, so our leaders match more the populations they're leading. Expertise earned and credentialed. I'm not on this webinar talking to you guys because of any best-selling book I wrote yet. That's up to you guys. Or any company that I worked for. I started explaining this stuff and it went viral, and now this is my full-time job. Human relations have long been face-to-face. I hope that we get to do that again sometime soon. Prior to the virus, in the developed world, we were spending 51% of our time online. I would guess now it's probably more like 85% of our time online. And then top 10 populations in the world, they used to be countries. They're now social media platforms, only 2 countries in that top 10 list, and all of that happened in the last 4 or 5 years. So if you look at this collectively, it's a redefinition of who we are, what we do, and where we're from, or how we define ourselves, how we express ourselves, and where we belong. And until we sort of work our way through this, it's going to be very difficult to learn and adapt for some folks who feel like they've lost their place in the world. So the second part, so that's the first part of the book, talks about changes, societal, technological, and how we've started adapting already. Second part of the book, I'm just going to briefly go into this part. This is how we let go of our occupational identity. We learn about how personal identity is formed. I interview an expert on psychologist and expert on identity. And then we talk about the uniquely human skills that are becoming increasingly important. But just to frame this whole section, I use an iceberg. because I think we have been using an iceberg. We've been completely not looking below the waterline at all. So the top of the iceberg is the skills to do, the skills for which you're hired. That becomes our sort of myopic obsession from grade school on, asking, figuring out what somebody's good at, what job they could have. Is it going to be employable in the future? We hire people for jobs based upon skills, but we only hire them for the skills we know about by the time we get them in the company and onboarded. Generally, that need has changed and we're not even screening for the right stuff. At the waterline, we're starting to pay attention to this. This is uniquely human skills, the things that make you better at your job, but also better in your relationships. They're all the human skills: creativity, communication, empathy, divergent thinking, critical thinking, negotiation, management skills. All of those skills, many of which we've left out of all of our workforce prep. And then we don't tend to explicitly reward them in organizations. We tend to focus more on the skills to do. Below that, and I get into this much more depth in the book, something I call the agile learning mindset. It's your ability to learn and adapt and your ability to understand market changes. You can no longer have a job where you say, this is what I do, I have no idea how the company works. You have to understand your organization's business model, how they create value, how they distribute that value, and how you connect to actually contribute to that value creation. Because if your company's business model changes, chances are good your role is going to need to change and you need to adapt ahead of that. And then at the basis of it is a resilient adaptive identity that's connected to your understanding of purpose. So that's why I talked about those 14 dimensions of societal cultural change, because if you feel like you've lost your place in the world because of those things, it's not easy to be vulnerable enough to learn and adapt. And if you don't have a connection to your curiosity or your purpose, you're not connected to your internal source of motivation, which is necessary to learn and adapt for life. So the third part of the book, I get into how you lead in this new normal. Chris and I say that every company has to focus on the inputs rather than the outputs. And one of the inputs is culture. And culture can be answered by three simple but very hard to answer questions. What's your mission? So why do you exist in the world? Why does your company even exist? Don't tell me about your brands and products. You can tell me about your customers, but what is the impact you wish to have on the world? And then vision, how does the world look differently because you exist? So what are the things you're doing to fulfill your mission? And then what are your values? What will and won't you do to achieve your vision and fulfill your mission? And if you can answer these questions, then you can start attracting people to your organization based upon having a common belief and a common mission, a common vision, and aligned values. So Chris and I think in the book that most companies focus on their outputs, their brands and their products, and products meaning any form of value, rather than focusing on their inputs, because culture is just your brand is just an expression of your culture. If you focus on your culture, the brand will be evident. And your products and services are just evidence of your capacity. And so one of the examples I use when I give talks is Netflix, for example. 1997, Netflix shipped DVDs by mail. 2007, Netflix switched to streaming. 2011, Netflix started making original content. Now 44% of their revenues are from original content. If they focused only on the process of shipping DVDs by mail, and if you worked for Netflix and you focused only on your skills and getting DVDs to the customers at the right time without the DVDs being broken, by 2007, much of your skill would not be relevant. But if you focus on the vision and the mission for Netflix and constantly upskilling your capacity, then you could pivot when Netflix pivoted their business models. And if you look at company, which is really just a collection of individuals, the individual input to culture is an alignment of passion, purpose, curiosity, and values. And human potential is really evidence of capacity. So if you attract people who are aligned with your values, aligned with your culture, interested in your mission, driven by a purpose and passion to fulfill your vision, and then they have at least the initial types of capacity you need for your existing business model, but an interest in constantly upskilling or upgrading their capacity, then you have someone within your organization that's agile, that will allow you to pivot across business models. And it's really just a shift from a focusing on what to a focusing on why and how you do things. So a number of people have asked what make for the highest performing teams. And in our definition in the book, we're talking about the highest performing teams in accelerated learning. Because if you look at what technology can do, it can expedite on the known, but it can't discover the unknown and the unknown unknowns. And in order to do that, you need to have teams on learning tours, particularly in VUCA environments, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so Google asked that question. They said, basically everything they do is learning when you look at it. Their output's digital, but their input is learning. And they looked across 180 teams for a couple of years in a project called Project Aristotle. They used all their data. So is it people who know each other well, who work best together? Is it same gender, different gender, same culture, same age? Is it diversity, representative diversity? What is it? And they discovered that the number one determinant of high-performing teams in accelerated learning first establishes psychological safety. That is sort of the safe space to say, I don't know, I was wrong, let's figure it out. But psychological safety also has to be married with dependability. Everybody on the team is accountable. The mission has clarity. The mission has purpose and meaning to the individuals and aligns with their values. But first and foremost was psychological safety. And so because I am a part-time New Yorker, I'm in Boston at the moment, but I do spend part-time in New York. I haven't been there since early March. I watch Cuomo every day and about lunchtime. And I noticed that he started branding New York. He started as part of his leadership in giving people updates on the virus. He started reminding people what they believe, what New York is about. And there's a whole video on this, which you can Google. They took one of his speeches and they put it to some imagery, which is pretty beautiful. But he says, we're tough, we're smart, united, disciplined, and loving. And we're going to get through this virus because of these attributes of who we are. And I've never seen a leader focus on articulating the culture and reinforcing the culture in the middle of a crisis, which I think is pretty profound. And so when I think about the book we wrote and this virus we're in, I find that most folks are feeling like we're on the edge of a raging river. And much of the media and much of our obsession is, understandably, this is a tragic moment for people's lives and their livelihoods, but staring at the swirling eddies that could catch us either in job loss and job change or lives lost. And it's totally understandable. What we need folks to do is lift their gaze up and see that on the other side of the river, the grass could be greener. We could make better paths than the one we've been on. We could make a more inclusive, more adaptive future, but we need to start articulating what that future looks like and how we get there. Because what we need to do is lead folks across and make them realize that we've already started crossing it. In most places, we've flattened the curve. We're in the process of doing it. We've made massive behavioral changes. We've done a tremendous job adapting already. And we will get to the other side of this, but we need leaders that can help us do that. And the virus is just a context in which I can explain some aspects of the book. So that's just a quick fly through the book, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thanks for doing that. Kind of wish I could open up the channels for applause right now, but we do have some questions that came in.
Okay.
Buckley Brinkman, who heads up the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing Productivity, he asks, this is not a light question to get it started, but what will be the most critical adaptations as we restart the economy?
I think first and foremost, we got to follow the science, and we're not used to following science every day. I mean, you look at how we live. We do kind of check the weather report and decide whether or not we need an umbrella for the day, but we're going to need that sort of check-in all the time to sort of say, is it safe to do this behavior? Is it safe to do that behavior? What precautions do I take for myself or with others? We've started making that sort of adaptation. The other ones are, if we do go into an office or a manufacturing facility, or however it is we work, do we need to do that? Now, many office workers are talking about when they're going to go back into the office, and I keep saying, why? Why are you going back in the office? What is it? And I think it may be important to do that, but we have to decide why we're doing it. When it comes to manufacturing or processing, obviously we've got to get humans to do that. So we need to get them safely to be there to do that. But the rest of us, I guess the question we've got to ask around everything we do is why, and is it safe?
One of the things that we touched on a little bit ago is around the tremendous adaptation that's taken place in the digitalization of education at the beginning of the crisis. And obviously a wide spectrum of results there, but we just saw in the news in the last 24 hours that Cal State University system has announced that they're not coming back to campus in the fall. You have talked in the past around changes that needed to occur in education. How do you think that's been impacted by this in terms of an accelerant?
Well, I think we've removed the I can't teach online argument because everybody's done it, and to a large extent, they've been very successful. Do I think all education should go online from here? No, I don't think so. But I think that it's it's a tremendous tool. I mean, can you imagine if we had the virus and we didn't have the internet? I mean, can you imagine if we all had to just teach our children in our homes with whatever books we happen to already have there? So I think it's giving us sort of a stress test of what we can do. And it just like going back to the office, I think we have to think about if we're, rather than saying, what can we put online? We have to stop and say, what worked, what didn't work, why didn't it work, and what needs to be in person, why does it need to be in person? And that would rethink our usage of all real estate settlement patterns. It has huge implications for, what college campuses are used for or school systems are used for. And maybe it becomes a more year-round thing with different modalities. I don't know. Be interesting to find out.
Yeah. You've made a great point the last couple of years of helping people understand that we were already living in a time of tremendous disruption, whether it's technology or climate change or the market changes and globalization and so forth. I'm curious, one of the biggest transformations that you outline in the book is around the switch from 40 years ago or so, companies' values being placed on tangible assets versus intangible assets today, and this thought of value in the scalable learning organization. You talked about it a little bit during your presentation, but I wonder if you could expand on that.
Yeah, so it used to be that, we look at, I think you're probably talking about the book where I talk about in 50-year increments, the most valuable companies. 100 years ago, it was meat production, steel processing. It was all extraction of value from natural assets. And then 50 years ago, it was all scalable production. What things can we make for consumers to consume, purchase, use in their home? And that's when we transitioned to be more of a consumerism society for the most part. And now it's all digital companies, and people get distracted by that, thinking it's all about digital, or it's all about technology, or it's all about data. And my argument is those are all just inputs for learning. So your organization's ability to learn and adapt is your greatest asset that you need to nurture. So it's intangible, but it's got to keep growing. So when Amazon sells you something, it's not about the thing they sold you or the price they got it for you. It's that what they can learn about what you bought, your behavior around it. So it's much more about what they can learn from you than anything they can sell you. And that's kind of the mindset we've all got to be in. So when we talk about data, we talk about digital, what we're really talking about is facilitating learning at scale.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite concepts of yours is around the tours of duty model for career planning and maybe even organizational development. I wonder if you could spend a couple of minutes just helping people understand, when you think about, as you mentioned, people entering the workforce today, 15, 16, 17 jobs, 5 different industries. Over the course of 50 or 60 years, that's a lot of not incremental change. It's this rapid unlearning and relearning and so forth. So I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I borrow from the best. That the concept of tours of duty came from Reid Hoffman in his book, Startup of You. Is also in a Harvard Business Review article. So if you want to learn more about his concept around that, definitely check out those sort of sources. But Reid's point when he wrote the book is that we have sort of 3 types of employees, and the faster we are recognizing it, the better. First is your foundational employee. That's the person who's going to join the company, and they're probably going to be there for life. And they're going to be part of your brand. So you think about like Johnny Ive in Apple, and Steve Jobs in Apple, and Bill Gates and Microsoft, and different people. Now they've left it. All of those guys have left it in one form or another, but they were part of the brand. Everything they did was in service of building that company. They're pretty rare, but there are still some people who spend their whole lives at a company. Faculty at a university are often in that place as well, where their research gets intermingled with the brand of the university. The second type is rotational. So that means you're going in to take a particular job or you should really be in it for 2 or 3 years where you're learning, you're contributing, but after a while, your contributions, if they don't change, you either should rotate out of that role or rotate up to another role or across to another role. And then the other type that he identifies is transformational. So those are people who go into organizations specifically to make a state change, launch a product, something like that. I added to that. I also think there's the contingent workforce, which wasn't on his radar screen when he wrote the book. And I think that's a bigger and bigger piece of the workforce, although we need a social safety net for that to be realized. But if companies really want access to a kind of the human talent cloud or the liquid workforce or whatever you want to call it, we need to have a social safety net for those guys. And there's another type of talent that I include, which is the executive producer. The kind of studio model of producing films really needs to be applied to the corporation. So that's somebody who comes into your organization, and not only do they know how to get something done, they know how to pull in all the talent, and often from their own network, in order to do that. So that's the 5 types of talent that I see. But when we talk about learning tours, it's really rather than hiring somebody with like you're marrying them, like they're going to be with your company, assuming everybody's foundational. We know that's not true. But setting expectations like, I'm hiring you into this tour that's going to be 3 to 5 years, because it's usually 1 year learning, 1 year of contribution, 1 year of transition. In some organizations, that takes 5 years. And then we'll reevaluate when you've got a year or so out, whether the tour needs to be extended or you should rotate into a different tour or go to a different company. If we had those explicit conversations, we'd have a much better sense of what we're doing as organizations, and also with the talent in which we engage.
Yeah, you made a great point before earlier in the conversation around even at a time where we're celebrating 3% unemployment and so forth, there's still the issue of underemployment and workforce participation rates and so forth.
Yeah.
As a function of this extraordinary level of unemployment now, after the virus, do you see that accelerating the gig economy or the contingent workforce?
It all depends on how we handle it. And I can't have this conversation without me sort of disclosing I'm much more liberal in my politics than conservative. So I think we probably need a massive, massive government investment on the scale of a New Deal, and maybe even bigger, because we have not even dealt with the 5 million manufacturing jobs we lost after the global financial crisis, or leading up to it and through it. And that's 5 million human lives that we didn't have a good answer to. And then a lot of those folks kind of fell into the death or despair trap because there was shifts in occupational identity. There was shifts in societal and cultural factors. They didn't feel like they had a place, and we didn't have a pathway for them. And that was just 5 million. Now we've got something closer to 30 million. So we need a better solution. But what's our goal? And I think we should reframe our goal to create taxpayers. What would you do if your goal was to create more taxpayers to drive the economy, as opposed to let's focus on preserving this wealth and preserving that wealth? Let's talk about an investment in a massive economic engine. And that would mean social safety nets, universal health care, and then incredible access to education and learning, but with personal responsibility and personal expectations that will give you the trampoline, but you got to bounce. You've got to bounce yourself forward. And so that's where I kind of meet left and right side of the equations. But I think that's what we need. Hard to have this conversation in the virus with this scale of unemployment, because I don't think we're going to switch the economy back on in like a month and everyone's going to become employed again. I think it's going to be a rockier ride, because some of those jobs went away and they aren't going to come back, just like when they were lost to technology.
Yeah, that's right. It's become one of my sort of least favorite analogies. Is it's not a light switch, it's a dial, but it's really like a production switcher or switchboard, right? There's thousands of dials. It's very complex. So, and when you look at the sheer numbers, the height of the Great Depression, it's 24.9% unemployment. We're at 15, maybe headed to as high as 25, according to Secretary Mnuchin. But in terms of human lives, it's 12.5 million at the time in 1933 versus 50 million at 25% today. Yeah. So it's an extraordinary scale. Jill Thede asks, culture is such an important part of the work environment. Any advice on fostering a positive, psychologically safe culture with an online workforce when missing the incidental day-to-day micro interactions that foster teamwork and understanding how do we adjust.
Yeah, I'm actually having a million conversations lately about that. Like, how do you establish psychological safety in a virtual environment, and how do you reinforce culture? I think one of the ways you do it is you start by focusing on being uniquely human, starting every conversation with your team. How are you doing? Like, so and so, I know you're a teacher as well, and you're worried about your parents. How are you doing? Asking people how they're doing and connecting with them, telling them a little bit, you don't have to overshare, but telling them a little bit about yourself, reminding people. Some of the best organizations I know don't just stamp culture on a coffee mug. They live it every day. They start every meeting by saying, this is what we believe. This is why we're doing this. And that's why this meeting fits into that. You can do it in 5 minutes, but reinforcing what you believe and sanctioning bad behaviors. We say, you know, that this is our culture, and then we let certain people, if they're the best salesperson or the best this or that, get away with behaviors that are an absolute violation of our culture. You have to stand up and say, this is, our culture is more important than any one individual star.
Thanks for that. Jeff Sherman, who owns On Milwaukee and Lift Digital, and he's an incredible entrepreneur and champion for the community in Milwaukee. He asks, does success become more collaborative now? And how do you define successes personally? What gives you the most hope right now?
I actually think we've been more moving towards collaboration and success for a while now, but we just haven't caught up with it. So one of the things I mentioned in the book is this study by Dr. William Muir, who is an evolutionary biologist at Purdue. And he studies how you breed productivity into animals, and mostly for food production. And so he started with chickens in the 80s, and then I got in touch with him and asked me a few questions. He emailed me and said, you know, listen, I've done it with every animal species, and the results are always the same. His first hypothesis is if you take a flock of chickens, and there's 9 in the flock, the way they were organized, and you say, I'm going to take the most productive hen, really, because hens are the ones that lay the eggs, out of each flock, and then put them in a flock where all the top performers are together in a single flock. And his theory was, or he wanted to test, is will you breed a kind of like a super chicken or a super hen pack that will produce many more eggs? And after he had left those hens alone for a period of time, he came back, and not only were they not productive, 6 of them were dead. And what he discovered was that productivity is a result of suppressing the productivity of the rest of the group. And that is actually true across all species. Another thing we mentioned in the group, it's also true of sports teams that are intradependent. So if success on the sport team depends upon the interactions between groups, close interactions, as opposed to coordinated individual performances, having more stars on the team, stars after a certain threshold, more stars on the team leads to lower performance. Because it's always been about the team, but we act like it's about the individual. We send people to the best schools who have the best marks, and then we hire the best people, and then we rate them within organizations. But one of the things Dr. Muir figured out was when he stopped studying the stars, but studying each flock that was most productive, and then he started breeding those flocks, you actually breed better productivity as a group than isolating individuals. And that's what we've done wrong with work and preparing for work. So I think collaborative success is going to be going forward. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book with Chris. I mean, I would have written maybe an okay book. With Chris, I knew I was going to write a great book. And I'm a Forbes contributor, but Forbes will only let you be an individual contributor. They don't let you write with other people. I'm like, why? This is the opportunity, as we're always stronger together when somebody's checking your blind spots.
Mm-hmm. Heather, anything else that you'd like to add before we get going here, or anything that you've got coming up besides the book?
No, I'm focused on the book. I've got a ton of talks coming up. If you follow me on heathermcgowan.com or on LinkedIn, send me, if you're interested in continuing the conversation, drop me a note. If you read the book, if you like it, I say write an Amazon review. If you don't like it, call me and tell me why. Appreciate the support, appreciate the chance to talk to you guys. We're really hoping this book can make an impact right now when so many of us need to adapt, which isn't easy. It's like being, you know, a hermit crab going from one shell to the other. You have to be sort of exposed and vulnerable till you move to the bigger shell and you grow into it. We're all going to have to go through that. And so we hope this book is helpful.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. Really appreciate it. And stay safe. Hope to talk to you soon again.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.